Greetings, fair listeners, and thank you for joining me once again as we celebrate stories and storytelling in all their forms and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I am the Tale Collector and your host, Erica Lynn Adams. On page 12 of his art book, The Goblins of Labyrinth, Brian Froud provides the following description of the goblin artist, Pug, pronounced for no apparent reason, Guppy. His early canvases, such as The Death and Destruction of a Million Goblins of Uncertain Dispositions, or his widely acclaimed Heads Being Banged by Something Big and Horrible, were wildly popular amongst goblins of all types and dimensions. His popularity began to wane, however, as he moved on to more experimental and, to the goblin mind, more controversial subjects, such as several beautiful princesses enjoying a wonderful picnic under the most pleasant circumstances, or the much reviled, happy goblins being pleasant to someone who was kind to them. Now obviously this is played for laughs. In all seriousness though, it is rather sad when an established artist, whether to expand creative horizons or for more personal reasons, creates something vastly different in style from their usual work, only for fans to reject it or never give it a chance despite its own unique merits. What if I were to tell you this very thing happened to the king of horror himself? Case in point, Stephen King's The Eyes of the Dragon, first published in 1984 and recommended for readers 13 and up. In the fair kingdom of Delaine, the flawed but well-meaning King Roland has sired two sons. Peter, the firstborn, is everything a fairy tale prince and heir to the throne should be: handsome, wise, brave, and strong. Secondborn Thomas, however, is not. Clumsy, sickly, slow-witted, and ever stuck in his elder brother's shadow. His bitter jealousy of Peter's achievements does not go unnoticed by Roland's court magician, Flag, who despises the royal family and seeks the ruination of Delaine. A few well-planted grains of dragon sand, the deadliest of all poisons, leaves King Roland in the agonizing throes of a fiery death, Peter framed and condemned to rot in Delaine's tallest tower, and the newly crowned Thomas to be controlled like the weak and frightened puppet Flag has raised him to be. But unbeknownst to the evil sorcerer, the two brothers each harbor a devastating secret, a desperate plan that could free Peter from his prison without, and a haunting memory that could free Thomas from his own within. King wrote and dedicated Eyes to his daughter Naomi, who requested a fantasy story from him as she preferred dragons over horror. Upon publication, however, many established fans were quick to snub the book, both because of its younger target audience and its lack of King's trademark horror elements. In fact, as of writing, except for 1977's Rage and 1981's Roadwork, this is his oldest novel to have received no kind of adaptation whatsoever. But this cool reception and his feeling stuck writing in the horror genre did help inspire the creation of King's next iconic novel, Misery, about a deranged woman keeping her favorite author hostage for daring to kill off her favorite character to move on to other stories. So, without The Eyes of the Dragon, we would never have gotten the gift of Annie Wilkes in all her psychotic, hobbling glory. Take that for what it's worth. While I'm not the biggest King fan, shocking I know, it would be too simplistic for me to say I like this book more than his others just because it's a fantasy. Much of it is generational. I have a much harder time understanding his plentiful 70s and early 80s pop culture references than I do fairy tale-like stories which are universal by design. So much the better to appreciate King's omniscient narrator. They remind me of John Hurt as the titular Jim Henson's The Storyteller, but with a seasoned voice more appropriate for a maturing teen audience. As modest as they are shrewd, this anonymous teller of tales addresses, informs, and entertains the reader in a way that invites them to think of the characters as more than mere players on a make-believe stage. Pages 52 through 54 of the circa 2001 Signet paperback edition. Perhaps you are wondering what Thomas was like, and some of you may already be casting him in a villain's part, as a willing co-schemer in Flag's plot to snatch the crown from its rightful owner. This was not really the case at all, although to some it always seems so, and of course Thomas did play a part. He did not seem, I admit, to be a really good boy, at least not at first glance. He was surely not a good boy in the way that Peter was a good boy, but no brother would have looked really good beside Peter, and Thomas knew it well by the time he was 4. The part Thomas played in his brother's imprisonment was dishonorable, but even so, he was not a really bad boy. I believe this, and hope that in time you will come to believe it too. Speaking of major players, this is in fact Flagg's second appearance after debuting as Randall Flagg in 1978's The Stand. King would bring new malevolent versions of him into future stories like the Dark Tower series, Hearts in Atlantis, and Gwendy's Button Box trilogy. This is the only Flagg story I've experienced as of writing, so I can't make any comparisons regarding his other depictions. All I can say here is that he plays the role of the classic evil wizard with handsome demonic skill and elegance. His ability to read and manipulate people as easily as his copy of Lovecraft's Necronomicon is what enables him to cause destruction with the swift and invisible indifference of a plague. Pages 60 to 63. He had come to Delaine from Garland in the time of Roland's grandfather. In those days he had appeared to be a thin and stern-faced man of about 40. Now, in the closing years of Roland's reign, he appeared to be a thin and stern-faced man of about 50. Yet it had not been 10 years, or even 20, between then and now. It had been 76 years in all. Who was he really, this dark man? I do not know. What did he want? That question I think I can answer. He wanted what evil men always want, to have power and to use that power to make mischief. Being a king did not interest him because the heads of kings all too often found their way to spikes on castle walls when things went wrong. But the advisors to kings, the spinners in the shadows, such people usually melted away like evening shadows at dawning as soon as the headman's axe started to fall. Flagg was a sickness, a fever looking for a cool brow to heat up. He hooded his actions just as he hooded his face. And when the great trouble came, as it always did after a span of years, Flagg always disappeared like shadows at dawn. Later, when the carnage was over and the fever had passed, when the rebuilding was complete and there was again something worth destroying, Flagg would appear once more. From what little I've read, several of King's human characters, good and evil alike, are often a combination of alcoholic, depressed, or dealing with some albeit important but otherwise mundane personal issues. This makes sense, of course, considering his own history with alcohol and cocaine addiction. Nevertheless, it really is refreshing to see him write a character who embodies humanity at its most noble and heroic. Peter, though just as realistically imperfect as any boy or man in a Stephen King novel, is one of those rare souls whose innate kingly virtues are apparent to literally everyone. Consider the scene from the 1959 religious epic Ben-Hur, in which Jesus Christ, with nothing but a gaze, brings comfort and joy to a beaten, water-deprived Judah, while making the bullying Roman soldiers think twice and back off. Likewise, Peter's bearing alone is enough to humble even the most hardened and cynical of hearts. Pages 45 to 46. Who told you to kill this horse? He asked. Yosef, a hardy and robust 60, was a palace fixture. He was not apt to brook the interference of a snot-nosed brat easily, prince or no. He fixed Peter with a thunderous, heavy look that was meant to wilt the boy. Peter, then just 9, reddened, but did not wilt. My father, and his father before him, and his father before him, Yosef said, seeing now that he was going to have to say something, like it or not. That's who told me to kill it. A horse with a broken leg is no good to any living thing, least of all itself. He raised the maul in both hands. Put it down, Peter said. Yosef was thunderstruck. He had never been interfered with in such a way. Here, what are you a-saying? You heard me. I said, put that hammer down. As he said these words, Peter's voice deepened. Yosef suddenly really realized, that it was the future king standing here in this dusty stable yard, commanding him. If Peter had actually said as much, if he had stood there in the dust squeaking, put that down, I said. I'm going to be king someday. King, do you hear? So put that down. Yosef would have laughed contemptuously, spat, and ended the broken-legged horse's life with one hard swing of his deeply muscled arms. But Peter did not have to say any such thing. The command was clear in his voice and eyes. Page 214. Peter smiled for the first time since he had come to this cold, high place. His cheeks and chin were shadowed with the beginnings of a beard which would grow full and long in these 2 drafty rooms, and he looked quite a desperate character, until he smiled. The smile lit his face with magical power, made it strong and radiant, a beacon to which one could imagine soldiers rallying in battle. The warders saw that smile and made no more jokes. There was something about it which forbade joking. And poor Thomas's inferiority complex festers before this apparent demigodhood. Even the perverse opportunity, courtesy of Flagg, to spy on his Peter-worshipping father through the glass eyes of a taxidermized dragon, hence the novel's title, is soured by the hypocrisy of the latter's disgusting drunkenness. Then, suddenly, Thomas is crowned for no other reason than one king is dead and another is incarcerated. Who cares if the new responsibility leaves him physically ill and at Flagg's honey-tongued mercy? That Thomas feels some validation at last is cheap because it hasn't been earned, petty because he thinks it has, and tragic because, after all this time watching him being second-rate, one still may not help but feel happy for him in a pitying sort of way. Pages 96 to 98. Thomas heeded Flagg's advice not to go often, but he did use the passageway from time to time and peeked at his father through the glassy eyes of Niner. And perhaps Flagg's instinct for mischief in this matter was not so bad at all, because by spying on his father, Thomas learned to feel a new thing for Roland. Before he knew about the secret passage, he had felt love for him, and often a sorrow that he could not please him better, and sometimes fear. Now he learned to feel contempt as well. Thomas would slide the little panels back after a while and slink down the corridor again, his head pounding and an uneasy grin on his face. The head and grin of a boy who has been eating green apples and knows he may be sicker by morning than he is now. This was the father he had always loved and feared? He was an old man who farted out stinking clouds of steam. This was the king his loyal subjects called Roland the Good? He peed into the fire, sending up more clouds of steam. This was the man who made his heart break by not liking his boat? He talked to the stuffed heads on the walls, calling them silly names like Bonzi and Stagpole and Puckerstring. I don't care for you anymore, Thomas would think, checking the peephole to make sure the corridor was empty and then creeping back to his room like a felon. You're a filthy, silly old man and you're nothing to me. Nothing at all. No! Pages 162 to 164. Flagg took Thomas's arm. In the years to come, it was a posture the inhabitants of the court city would become familiar with, Flagg appearing to bear the boy king up as if he were an old man instead of a healthy youngster. A cheer so great it was like the sound of surf breaking against the long, desolate strands of the eastern barony greeted their coming. Thomas looked around, amazed at the sound, and his first thought was, "Where is Peter? Surely this must be for Peter." Then he remembered that Peter was in the Needle and realized the cheering was for him. He felt a dawning pleasure, and I must tell you that the pleasure was not just in knowing the cheers were for him. He knew that Peter, locked in his lonely tower rooms, must hear the cheering too. What does it matter now that you are always the best in lessons? Thomas thought with a mean happiness that pricked him even as it warmed him. What does it matter now? You are locked in the Needle, and I am to be king. He couldn't see if Peter was looking down, but he hoped Peter was. He hoped Peter was looking down and biting his lips in frustration until the blood flowed down his chin, as Thomas had often bitten his own lips, bitten them until there was a fine white network of scars there. "Do you hear that, Peter?" he shrilled in his mind. "They're cheering for me! They're cheering for me! They're finally cheering for me!" Even after reading some of his more traditional works, and long before becoming spoiled on the more creatively grotesque fare of Clive Barker and Junji Ito, I still think Stephen King is overrated, but I do respect him greatly. And even if I didn't, I honestly do think his earlier readers' opinions were premature on this one. Though no Hobbit or Harry Potter, let alone Carrie or Cujo, The Eyes of the Dragon is a straightforward but enthralling medieval tale of good versus evil. Consider how much non-horror King has written in the years since, and give this early experiment a spot in the firelight. Gather round next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you.